David, our viewership might be a little bit off this morning. I think a lot of people are enjoying some of the fake news being generated by President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen. But of course, they can watch on playback. I'm pleased to be with you here slightly early this morning. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, Jason. Nice to be with you.
So we've got this continuing and persistent effort from some very bizarre people around the internet that seem incredibly focused on some of the things that you have said, that I have said, but simultaneously unable to either properly listen or hear or recall, or perhaps they're just making things up. They like to say that you or I have said things that we haven't actually said. They inject fake news, and some of it seems rather, I don't know where they get it from. They say things like I'm from a broken home, like I've planned a dirty bomb hoax. These things are totally incorrect and more reflective of themselves. David, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I think the murder of Gareth Williams, the GCHQ spy in the UK, his body was found in August of 2010.
Mm-hmm. We've spoken about him in the
extraordinary
past.
thing about this guy, well, it's a cold case, but the clues, I actually have coined a phrase based on my past experience with the second law of thermodynamics, which is the science of hot air, waste, and chaos, which is a great metaphor to apply to politicians and Dave Sweigert, but that's kind of by the by. But the second law says something to the effect that energy is neither lost nor gained in a process, but some energy is always wasted. And there's been a lot of fuss by these lesser creatures about whether I'm justified in describing myself as a forensic economist. But economics is all about reduction in waste, to my mind. There is a National Association of Forensic Economists in the United States, which I wasn't aware of until I did a cross-check on my own rights to call myself a forensic economist. And there's nothing so representative in Canada. And I adopted the title because I think forensic accountants and forensic economists very often miss something fundamental, that in any crime, and that is a crime that might one day bring some of the players to court, where you have to give evidence, forensic evidence, hopefully, that is either true or false. In any crime, it's a good idea, I think, to remember my riff on the second law of thermodynamics. That is to say, evidence is neither lost nor gained in a crime scene investigation, but evidence is always wasted, or some evidence is always wasted. Now, if you look at the crime scene, you got it, or ignored, or planted, or manipulated. But you know, even when, as for example, there's a line of people with FBI T-shirts outside the Pentagon 10, 15 minutes after impact, whatever it was, the debate as to what hit the Pentagon was almost irrelevant. What is particularly relevant is within 15 minutes of impact, there's a line of people with FBI T-shirts, as far as I can judge, picking up evidence, putting it into brown paper bags, and taking it away. Well, that's not very professional, is it? I mean, you know, brown paper bag, and where's the yellow tape, et cetera, et cetera. The case of the Gareth Williams is more extraordinary. It's probably one of the most compelling crime scenes, at least for me. I think it's on the level of the Barry and Sherman double hanging murder by the indoor swimming pool and the John Bonet Ramsey. That is to say, the crime scene is stuffed with evidence and clues, yet those crimes are unsolved. So what's going on here? Well, let me just jump very quickly to the network sniffing. Just before we started the show, we started talking about Sweigert's background, and one of his other claims to fame, I suppose he has a few, because he's, you know, the battle he's been waging with you and the truth, etc., is I asked you what network sniffing was, and I think you said, well, you're looking for opportunities to exploit. Well, this guy describes himself as a hacker. He's written a book on ethical hacking, whatever that means. He also describes himself as a specialist in social engineering, which reminds me of the patent taken out by Kinetic North America Limited, what's that? Social Engineering Protection Appliance.
Yeah.
And the course given by Serco. And you know what? Let me jump to it. I think Sweigert, whether the right term is jump the shark, I think he's trying to throw Serco under a bus. Now, why would I say that? Well, he's written a letter, February the 20th, 2019, to Maxine Brown, amongst others, a director of computer science, electronic, visualization lab, University of Illinois at Chicago. Might be worth putting up a picture of her, because I don't say she looks scary, but she's someone that I think could usefully inhabit the evil Batcave and scare the hell out of any people who are tempted to buy a ticket and get in. But anyway, by the by, nothing personal. This letter has as a title, The Misuse of NSF-acquired technologies to facilitate the high-speed transfer of snuff films via the UIC Electronic Visualization Laboratory. Now, you started this by saying something to the effect, these guys are putting words in our mouth or not saying what we said.
Yeah.
Now, I never referred to NSF, I guess that's the National Science Foundation, acquired technologies to facilitate the high-speed transfer of snuff films. Neither did I refer to high-speed transfer of snuff films, although actually that was what I was talking about. So it's extraordinary that this guy Sweigert should phrase it, and then he's copied, well, he copied, I think, the state of Illinois police, etc., etc. So I'd like to thank him, actually, if I may have that privilege, Jason, because I think he's drawn attention to my belief that the evil Batcave is being used to transfer high-speed snuff film, but I'd never put it so succinctly in the words that he's offered us. So I think we owe him some great, he's wandering around very clumsily. He's actually drawn a lot of attention, I think, because Maxine Brown is obligated, I believe, to investigate whether or not her evil Batcave could have been used or hijacked or sniffed by, perish the thought, Dave Sweigert, because it's exactly the kind of target this man would seem to have favored. Is that,
David,
do you think that's plausible?
I think so. I just wanted to tell you that I've Googled a network sniffer. It's also known as a network analyzer, a protocol analyzer, or a packet analyzer, and it's a software or hardware tool that can intercept and log traffic on a digital network as data flows across the network. The sniffer captures each packet and, if necessary, decodes the packet's raw data. Sounds like step one for a man-in-the-middle attack, if you ask me.
Right. Now, this guy Sweigert, I think you're absolutely right. This guy Sweigert, I think I've got no skills in that area. He obviously fancies himself as a very capable ethical hacker, even if that's oxymoronic. But what happens if there are much smarter ethical and unethical hackers that come in behind him and are discovered as a result he has inadvertently set them into an ambush? Now, let's go back to Gareth Williams. Gareth Williams was a Cambridge graduate, brilliant mathematician, joined GCHQ, I think, in 2001, is alleged, I believe, to have listened to a telephone conversation between Osama bin Laden and his mother, and was seconded to MI6, which is the external intelligence arm of the British services, and made frequent trips to Fort Meade.
Ah, yes.
So what kind of network? Yeah, what kind of network would this man have been hacking into? Well, it turns out that he made his boss really cross, because either at GCHQ or MI6, because he hacked into the Clinton diary. Well, that would be a horror story, wouldn't it? I mean, Clinton, 26 trips to Little St. John's Island in the Ladita Express, with a couple of tours maybe of operating that dental chair in one of the bathrooms. I mean, Bill Clinton made 26 trips, and Hillary Clinton made 6 trips, and another a number of other Illuminati, I believe, made trips to that island. But it was basically set up as a pedophile pimping entrapment network. So what did Gareth Williams know, and when did he know it? And did he get into that network through a back door, carelessly, willfully, maliciously, or criminally left by Dave Sweigert? So Sweigert has got a lot to answer for, because this guy, this was the highest profile murder of a intelligence agent in the United Kingdom, ever, I believe. And again, there were clues all over the place. The body had probably been left there about 2 weeks. It was inside a holdall, a north face holdall, which was padlocked, right? So these clowns tried to frame him as a cross-dressing deviant, if you will, who maneuvered himself into this bag and then locked the padlock from the outside and removed all his own fingerprints. I mean, you know, how dumb can they get? It gives a bad name, I think, to crime scene investigation. His SIM cards and his telephone were left in a sort of ritualistic cross on the table inside the living room of his apartment. The body had been decayed, I think intentionally. My understanding, a product like, I think, sodium perborate or some kind of powder had been put on the body to accelerate the decomposition.
Wow.
What if this poor man had been put in this condition alive, right, with a zip open, and then tortured? Is there anyone on these bizarre networks who's really, really, really into torture? Well, setting aside Bill Clinton and the dentist chair on Little St. John's Island, there is a woman that you and I know very well as part of the teachers, the elite teachers community, who gives a seminar on Northwestern University, Northwestern University, on torture paradigms and practice.
Yeah.
And this bitch, excuse the French, she was the founder, with Bill Ayers, of the Weather Underground terrorist organization. And you know what, Jason? I think she still is. I mean, that is to say, she founded a long time ago, but that organization was never dismantled. It was merged and incorporated in, I believe, Northwestern University's IT partnerships, of which the principal media outlet is the BBC. Over to you.
Well, David, it's a lot that you're laying out, and it's always stunning information. But again, I find that when you focus on the details of exactly what is being said, there's a lot there. I want to start with Fort Meade because, of course, our friend David Sweigert has he's revealed a lot about himself in an argument with another incompetent individual named Nathan Stoltman. Sweigert indicates that he had sent letters from Fort Meade, that he has been involved with the Department of Homeland Security. He's been a contractor to the NSA. As you've said, he's an expert at packet sniffing, network sniffing. Who knows what he's sniffing? But he has been associated with Fort Meade. So again, we haven't accused Sweigert of anything. And it's also interesting that as a military man, or a former military man, he doesn't seem to know the difference between an attack and a defensive response. Neither does our moronic friend from the UK who's residing in Poland. We had no knowledge of these individuals before you and I started asking questions about the Federal Bridge. What are all these vastly different and seemingly unrelated entities doing on this public-private key infrastructure? And is it possible that something like this could be hacked? These individuals injected themselves into the discourse to make these incredibly overt gestures, as you've pointed out, including mailing letters to all kinds of people. And we're not upset that they're mailing these letters. In fact, he's doing a great job of identifying the people who should be investigating this, because he's wrongfully explaining, or perhaps he's trying to be sarcastic, but I don't know that the sarcasm reads in the written word. He's positioning it that we've accused these companies and entities of doing something. We haven't. We're just suggesting that they may be susceptible to hacking, and here comes this self-proclaimed ethical hacker to violently protest the mere suggestion. I think he's sniffing too many packets, David.
Yeah, maybe he got into a night in the evil Batcave with Maxine Brown, right? But I hope that wasn't on film. I mean, I hope he's got a sense of humor. Maybe we'll meet him one day.
Oh, I hope not, except in a courtroom or behind a piece of glass while he's wearing orange pajamas. David, before we get too deeply into this, I do want to remind people that every Friday you and I are doing shows that are available exclusively to our sponsors on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, as well as patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Mr. Sweigert seems to have a problem with you and I trying to create an educational and informative and entertaining talk show in which we ask questions about valid things. What hit the Pentagon on 9/11? Could this public-private key infrastructure be hacked by those that proclaim themselves to be ethical hackers, but are obviously so incompetent that they cannot even comprehend what's being said on this program? Leads me to believe that someone of that low mental capacity might in fact be exploited himself by a very sophisticated hacker, such as Gareth Williams, a guy who now is dead and was stuffed into a gym bag and padlocked from the outside. I do agree with you, David, that the murder of Gareth Williams seems connected to some of the other murders that you and I have discussed, only in and of the fact that it's so brutal and so bizarre. It's not like someone broke into the apartment and shot him and stole something and left. This was really carefully planned.
Oh yes, there's a script here, and the script is meant to create a visual scene that, for the great majority of people, they don't even want to look at it or discuss it or whatever. Let me just can I back up here to a sort of general approach to crime scene investigation in the context of the kind of people who would do that to another human being? I think even the most courageous people investigating crimes, when they detect or sense there's a possibility some of these cruelties could be inflicted on their family or whatever, I would think there's a great tendency to back off. Now, how do we get around that? And so I've discussed, and I haven't gone into great detail yet with you and some of my other supporters, the idea that in order to investigate crimes on this scale and this level of brutality, we need to understand very well the networks on which they're perpetrated. So in Sweigert's words, he uses these words: misuse of National Science Foundation acquired technologies to facilitate the high-speed transfer of snuff films via the UIC Electronic Visualization Laboratory. So let's say that he's right. I mean, I think he's tried to pick up what I've said, misinterpreted it and represent it. But let's say, broad brush, he's correct in asking, or justified in asking, Maxine Brown and the State Police of Illinois to investigate this network. Well, if this network is protected by the kind of people who would do the kinds of things they did to the Shermans or JonBenet Ramsey or Gareth Williams, whoever is investigating that network is got to have real cojones, if that's the right word, to proceed on the basis that at any time their nearest and dearest might be attacked by these vermin. For me, there's only one way. It's a bit, if you could go back to the homepage of my new website, I've got a logo there, but it's a very important one. Yes, you see down on the left there, I've got binoculars where the two arms of the binoculars have been spun round. So AI Hawk and Truthman is looking down on the right-hand side arm of the binoculars, and Reverse CSI is looking up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, why have I done that? Well, there's a concept in engineering, and I believe it applies to oilfield interpretation and crime scene investigation, called negative feedback. That is to say, the basis of my deductive computing machine that I invented back in the 1980s, you make a hypothesis, or maybe what Sweigert would call a simulation, of what you believe to be true or what you want people to perceive to be true.
Right.
And then you watch their reaction to see if they're picking up what you're laying down. I think that's a slang term. So if Sweigert wants people to believe that you and I are making nasty remarks about whether or not he's committed some crime, he's constantly monitoring you and I to see whether he's being successful. He's planting a fake news story.
Indeed.
A fake news story of the kind commissioned by the UK at Hawkins in the United Kingdom with Serco, because Serco provides what is called resilience training For all I know, they're probably the leading supplier of resilience training around the world for events like the attack on the Pentagon or in the North Tower. After all, Serco's shareholders were on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. As far as I know, they were conducting resilience testing for an attack on the towers. Very important for Americans to understand what those shareholders were. There's a whole group of shareholders who are not really interested because it's not their money. So let's say 10 global custodian banks with $110 trillion of assets under management. They couldn't give a shit if the two towers came down on the same day. It's not their money. You have the three countries, and this is very interesting. These are the shareholders of Serco on the morning of 9/11 on the 47th floor of the North Tower. The three countries are the government, the British government, the Saudi Arabia government, and the Singaporean government. Well, what the hell is the Saudi Arabian government sending a shareholder representative to a meeting of Serco on the 47th floor of the North Tower just before it's brought down? Then you have the state of California. Then you have two very interesting organizations, because the only organizations, institutions that I could find that might be really concerned if both towers came down, because it's their money. That is to say, the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association of the United States and the University Superannuation Scheme of the United Kingdom. Between them, roughly $1.5 trillion of assets under management, and it's their money, Jason. So which teachers might have gone rogue on the pension fund? When I say rogue, decided, hey, there's a lot of money here. Why can't we work out a scam where we take a great deal of money out of that pension fund, of course, at the cost of the other regular members? Good, I see you. You're getting ahead of me there.
I'm beginning to understand your language, David.
Right. So there you have Bernadine Dawn. Apparently, in her early years, she hitched her skirt up as high as could and attracted the attention of a group of leftist network sniffers, I think. But anyway, perish the thought. But anyway, these clowns organized the Days of Rage in Chicago in 1968, and of course attracted a whole bunch of people who apparently would like to overthrow the government of the United States by force. They let off various bombs, including a bomb in a woman's washroom in the Pentagon, but a whole series of bombs. They are vermin, right? And I believe on September the 11th, 2001, some article came out penned by Bill Ayers, which said, "We're sorry we didn't do more." Well, you've seen that photograph that was used to promote the 10 millionth patent of the United States. That was a patent taken out by Raytheon for 3D imaging using laser technology. Now, I don't know exactly what Bill Ayers means when he says he's sorry he didn't do more, but when you compare the wasteland of Manhattan after that attack, I don't think there's a lot more he could have done. He basically razed it to the ground. Now, when I say he razed it to the ground, he must know, as a former faculty member of the University of Illinois, Chicago, he must know of the existence of the evil Batcave and what its potential would be for reverse engineering a crime scene. So to cut to the chase, what I believe we need to do, or what I'm planning to do, is set up, as I've discussed, or the idea of an endowment, which we might call HGT Endowment Fund, which is Hawkins, Goodman, and Teachers Endowment Fund, because you and I don't have the kind of money the teachers have. But what I'm saying to the teachers, why be so dumb as to get trapped on the 47th floor of the North Tower in what I call a double occurrence cat bond fraud? Let me explain what I mean by that. If some of these teachers, and the 4 other rogue teachers, I believe, were Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were on faculty at Georgetown University, and I think in the late 1970s, And our friend Barack Hussein Obama, ought to be better known as Barry Switoro, because his stepfather was one of the senior people in Indonesian military intelligence. His mother was a lefty who I believe, I think she had an affair with Frank Marshall Davis, because
Indeed.
the physiognomy of Barack Hussein Obama really resembles this guy, who wrote a book about, I don't know, some vile sexual practice, but it would appear that Frank Marshall Davis was a pedophile together with his wife. So anyway,
Really?
kind of by the by. If you look at Barack Hussein Obama, he was a lecturer, senior lecturer, I think, at University of Chicago. And Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, got a gig as community vice president for Chicago University's medical hospitals, which is an avid practitioner of late-term abortion. And she was on $315,000 a year. Of course, you know, it's always so easy to go off and down rabbit holes. I hope you'll excuse me there. Let me come back to this idea that the teachers were the victims, the teachers' pension funds were the victims of a massive catastrophe bond fraud on the 47th floor that started on the 47th floor. That is to say, as they entered that room and Christopher Hyman came down from the windows of the World Restaurant, what might he have given them as a way of an investment opportunity in what was about to happen? Well, if you set up a cat bond that insures you against the risks of both towers coming down through fire on the same day, if you sat on the sponsor side of that bond and, let's say, popped in, I don't know, $100 million from a cartel of shareholders, on the other side of that cat bond, let me just turn that up, on the other side of that cat bond, you have an investor, which I believe were the two big teachers' pension funds.
David, can I pause you for a moment?
Yes.
Because there's something I wanted to ask from the beginning. There was this question posed by one of the incompetent individuals who reviews each of our shows. He said that you had stated that you're a PhD, that you're the world's first forensic economist. I've never heard you say either of those things. Have you made either of those claims?
No, I've never claimed to be a PhD, but I have claimed to be a forensic economist. And
but not the first forensic economist, right? You don't claim to have invented the field of forensic economy, do you?
No, I might have done. I mean, if I did, I'm quite proud of it. But right,
but
let me just
explain. The reason I
what,
ask is perhaps you misspoke in saying that. This individual seems to immediately jump to the presumption that if someone says something incorrect, it's a deliberate lie. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt and presume that if they've misspoken, perhaps it's a mistake. There may be some other reason for the statement. It doesn't necessarily automatically prove that something is a lie. And in fact, this very guy called me months ago, over a year ago, proclaiming that you and Field McConnell were lying to me. And he presented what he considered proof. This guy uses very imprecise language. Proof is something that is judged by a different standard depending on the form in which it is being evaluated. A mathematical proof is dramatically different than a proof of guilt in a United States court of law versus the proof of guilt in a court of law of some other country or a civil court in the United States. So I like to examine elements of evidence, and if you did say in the past that you were the world's first forensic economist, I assume there's an explanation. Perhaps you didn't know that forensic economists actually existed, and you might have thought you invented it.
No, actually it's quite interesting, because it's an interesting problem when you go back into the state of mind of when you come up with a term like the first, and it's quite possible I did put that term in, but my state of mind...
But we should say now that it would be incorrect if you had said that in the past.
Yes. I'm not a registered forensic economist in the United States of America, right? However, I think if I did use the term the first forensic economist, it comes back to the context of that second law of thermodynamics, where I worked in thermodynamics at Cambridge as a student. That was a particular favorite subject of mine. And this realization that to bring a crime scene into a court of law, you needed evidence where a lot of evidence has been wasted.
Yes.
Right? And so I was talking about myself because the word economist generally means it's addressing issues of waste. What's the proper way of using resources running through a crime scene?
Now, pardon me again, David. I don't mean to keep interrupting, but I'm on a little bit of a path here that I'd like to advocate for you. Because if you did say you were the first forensic economist, even if you said that, I still don't think it's fair to qualify that as a lie unless there are other specific things being said. Now, I'm looking at this National Association of Forensic Economists, which has its headquarters, it looks like, either in Pennsylvania or Kansas here in the United States. So if it's a national association, this is a U.S. association, perhaps you might have meant you were the first forensic economist in Canada. I don't know.
Well, that's it. It was a term that I'd never heard of in Canada, right? Which is where I was living. And I come upon this term, and I've started to work on crime scene investigations. And I begin to notice the amount of evidence that is being wasted at these big events. So I do understand what an economist is. I understand forensic is the kinds of people who take it into a court of law to argue from a fact pattern to whether or not a jury is going to find someone guilty or innocent or whatever.
Now, so sorry, David, let me just continue for one more moment in my capacity as your advocate. Because, of course, there is an association, the American Society of Cinematographers. Now, I'm not a member of this association, although I have been to events at their extremely impressive clubhouse in Hollywood, and famous cinematographers who people have heard of course, are members of this association. Now, despite my lack of membership, I'm still a cinematographer. I could claim to be an American cinematographer because I am both of those things. So if I said I'm an American cinematographer, morons on the internet could say, oh, look, Goodman's not in this picture of the association, the American Society of Cinematographers, so he's lying. So again, jumping to this conclusion that someone is lying because you don't understand what they're saying is a completely fraudulent way to conduct an investigation or even to conduct oneself on YouTube. And I would also caution these individuals, what you and I are proposing, David, or I should say specifically, what you have proposed, is the notion that we would continue to investigate these cold case murders that haven't been solved, in many cases don't have autopsies or have autopsies that are incomplete, inconsistent with crime scene photos, etc. And in some cases, particularly Barry and Honey Sherman, these are cases where the families are even asking for help from outside people, individuals, and investigators. We're merely proposing that people who watch our program participate in a campaign to assist these injured families, these injured communities. It seems to me what Mr. Sweigert and his ill-advised associates on the internet are attempting to do is put together a fund to bring fraudulent lawsuits against you and I. And I would caution anyone who is considering getting involved with David Sweigert that I see evidence that he has committed felonies, and therefore conspiring with him could expose you to serious legal issues if law enforcement authorities choose to act on the evidence that I am actively providing of these felonies. Things like mail fraud, fraud on the court, things that he has done. This organized harassment campaign where I don't know who he is, and he starts making taunting, threatening videos, bringing lawsuits, aligning himself with people who seem to be engaged in money laundering schemes on the internet. And then he comes and speaks of us. When we respond, he considers that defensive response an attack. Not too smart.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me give these people a warning. My ambition as a forensic economist, perhaps the first forensic economist to pursue this rather interesting riff on the second law of thermodynamics, which I'll repeat for these clowns, Evidence is neither lost nor gained in a process such as crime scene investigation, but some evidence is always wasted. Now, one form of wasting energy is the injection of fake news or spoliation. So I would say to David Sweigert and this clown who thinks I'm lying about being the first forensic economist, you should be very careful, because as Sweigert says, there appears to be a misuse of NS technology to facilitate the high-speed transfer of snuff films via the UIC Electronic Visualization Laboratory. Now, I think he's used that word high speed because he's aware that the fiber optic links that have put together some of the nodes of this vast network assembled through the University of Illinois, Chicago, and Northwestern University would allow you to transfer a real-time live broadcast mass snuff film. Now, those words, Mr. Sweigert, are the words used by Dr. Thomas Barnett. A live broadcast mass snuff film, the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history, referring to the incidents in the North Tower where people threw themselves out of the window, where the 47th floor had been vacated by a possible client of his, i.e. the British company Serco Group and its shareholders. Now, Sweigert, the clown, writes to Serco International, or Incorporated, in Washington or Virginia, saying that you and I, Jason, are engaged in tortious interference of the shareholders of Serco Inc. And I reminded him through the show that Serco Inc. doesn't have any shareholders because it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Serco Group that had a shareholders meeting on the 47th floor of the North Tower and apparently triggered a major catastrophe bond fraud on the teachers' pension fund.
Now, David, may I interject to augment what you're saying? Because here's another Saul Alinsky-esque irony that I'd like to share with our viewers with regard to what Mr. Sweigert is doing on an incredibly persistent schedule. He is actually engaged in tortious interference because he's sending all these letters to Jack Conte, the CEO of Patreon.com. And he is blanketing Mr. Conte with these letters that contain false interpretations of things that we've said, false statements, false accusations, and it's clear that his intention is to defund this operation, to accuse me of things that are wholly untrue. And he's made false statements to law enforcement and various members of the military in furtherance of his pursuit to, in his own words, fuck me up. And the recording of him stating those words will be provided as evidence in the proceedings that he is attempting to bring forward. He's sent a letter to the captain of the Coast Guard here in New York, alerting him that there is apparently, according to Sweigert, I know nothing about this, but some plans for a hoax that should concern the Coast Guard. Now, I don't know what he thinks he's doing, but the Coast Guard is a division of the U.S. military intended to protect the people of New York. And when you just go sending them letters, they're going to investigate. So he thinks I'm angry or upset that he's sending these letters. I am a little irritated that he keeps sending letters to Patreon, but in the end, I'm confident that that will just serve as additional evidence of what I'm saying. His persistent effort to commit tortious interference by injecting fake news to business associates of mine, including Jack Conte, guy I do regular business with each month. Sweigert is trying to get Patreon to stop doing that, to stop allowing you and I, David, to broadcast these shows every Friday to our generous sponsors on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and of course on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. This is how you and I are earning a living right now, and if Mr. Sweigert doesn't approve of that, well, he's certainly welcome to present factual evidence, but what he's doing is making up nonsense and conspiring with others around the internet to break the law, to engage in civil torts, and just generally be a troublemaker.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I urge, as I've said before, I value immensely the donation, the subscriptions, the sponsorship of the Patreon subscribers. And I do believe our best defense against this attempt, I don't know if deplatforming is the right word, is for the people who support us and listen to us and really enjoy where we're going with this, to go out and get a friend so that we can add to the community that understands the end goal here. At least, you know, my end goal that I think I share with you. I believe these great crimes where there's this in the background, a dark force that is able apparently to pull off these incredibly brutal crimes and get away with it. That drives me nuts. I mean, if you go up to the pig farm in British Columbia, where I believe Starnet Communications was using this bit spreading technology to transfer snuff films.
What's their address again, David? Carroll Street?
425 Carroll Street, right, in Vancouver. And the offices of the company AMEC and H.A. Simons was immediately above Starnet Communications, which had 3 floors, mezzanine and up, where they were engaged in, allegedly, in the production of hardcore pornography, which I think were the snuff films out at the pig farm, child pornography, and online gaming. And 100 law enforcement officers raided that place on the 20th of August 1999, listen carefully, Mr. Sweigert, and took away all the kit. Now, I'm starting to think the kit that they took away reeked of some amateurish network sniffer who maybe found an opportunity to hack into the police networks, the Vancouver police networks or the RCMP, and allowed the people who were going out to the pig farm, to the Friday night raves, i.e. 1,700 to 2,000 people coming from all over North America, including your country, right, would go out to a Friday night rave at the pig farm, where in the period 1996 to 2002, 60 primarily First Nations prostitutes were murdered, possibly run live through a wood chipper. Apparently, in the case of 6 dismembered bodies, they found bullets, which indicated they'd been shot, right? And how do you assemble 1,700 people at a rave where there's ritualistic killing and cannibalism of First Nations prostitutes without hacking into a network such as the Vancouver Police or the RCMP network and sending the good guys in the wrong direction like happened on 911? And who has the technology to put such a network together? Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Sweigert, I'm assuming he's going to listen to this. Yeah. It's an outfit called Donald Detweiler and Associates of Richmond, British Columbia, which was responsible for implementing Entrust, which was a spin-off from Nortel, which is one of the members of the Northwestern University IT partnership networks. And from a period of 93 to 96 or 7, McDonald Detweiler had installed and taught a whole bunch of people around the world how to use public key infrastructure in a manner protected by the likes of you. I suggest that you hacked into it and you're so incompetent you left a back door that other people, organized crime networks, actually got in and were able to move killers from the United States, possibly by Con Air, out to the pig farm to stage cannibal feasts and serial killing and online betting on the length it would take for people to die. So
David,
you're
let me
treading...
just clarify that language a bit. You suggest that it's possible that he could have.
Yes, incompetently.
Yes, well, certainly. Everything he does is done incompetently.
Right, but let me just explore that possibility. He is saying, and I don't know whether he believes he's faithfully represented what I've said, but I'll read again. These are his words. He's written it to Maxine Brown, Director of Computer Science, Electronic Visualization Lab, University of Illinois at Chicago, which is one of the partner members of Northwestern University. That the heading for this letter is "The Misuse of NSF-Acquired Technologies to facilitate the high-speed transfer of snuff films via the UIC Electronic Visualization Laboratory. If Mr. Sweigert is in the business of social engineering and hacking and network sniffing, why wouldn't we assume that he'd been employed perhaps by the National Science Foundation to check the vulnerabilities of these networks to hacking and prevent the possibility that they might be used to transfer snuff films? So he has a problem, because if he's incompetent, he may be held responsible for the wrongful death of these women, if you see what I'm saying. So we don't have to prove, that is, you and I, we're not in the business of proving murder one, because the courts and the jury are so terrified of this dark force that they're probably never going to pass a guilty verdict on people, even if all the evidence is staring them in the face. The technique that I think we've developed very successfully is to explain to an injured community that their proper remedy is likely to be to find the custodians of the patented devices that were used negligently, recklessly, willfully, or fraudulently, and resulted in the wrongful death of members of some injured community. And I think that this, the bit spreading patent is an absolutely fundamental part of that process, whereby you might be able to transfer high-speed snuff films and get away with it. So I think it's interesting to go back to the collage at the beginning that you put together, Jason, just to talk about the Gareth Williams case.
Sure. There we are.
Okay, so on the right-hand side, what you've got there, if you can zoom in a little bit, you've got the Federal Bridge, which is essentially an implementation by Entrust, right?
Which Sweigert has worked for.
Exactly. And Entrust spun off from Nortel and hired McDonnell Detweiler and Associates, which is now called Maxar Technologies, one of whose directors is Joanne Isham, the CIA director of clandestine operations for many years, as I understand it. And McDonnell Detweiler, now called Maxar Technologies, implemented training sessions around the world in Russian and Spanish and French for public key infrastructure, as embraced or endorsed or supported by Sweigert's network sniffing and social engineering capability. So that network is essentially constructed, aided and abetted by Maxar Technologies, which also provided the mobile radio data management system to the Vancouver police during the period when women were being abducted from the downtown east side, taken out to the pig farm, and slaughtered and eaten. And in the fridge at the pig farm, they found body parts in the fridge. Sorry to be unpleasant, but I'm feeling unpleasant, Jason, because justice has not been done for these poor women. Justice has not been done for the Shermans. It's not been done for the John Benet Ramsey. It certainly hasn't been done for the former Cambridge mathematician, educated mathematician. And I pride myself on my mathematics abilities, and that's kind of by the by, it's not personal. The GCHQ spy who was working for Her Majesty's government in good faith, and he got caught up in the kind of morass of deception, which you seem to be addicted to, Sweigert. And the poor man, so he stuffed it naked into this bag, probably alive, because that turns the crank of Bernadine Dawn and her friends at the evil Batcave, right? And then, now we don't know where this was done, but it probably, I believe, was done in Fort Meade or a hotel nearby.
We also don't know what Sweigert might have been sniffing during this time frame.
Or Bernadine Dawn, or the using of the evil Batcave to record a snuff film, a live broadcast. Because remember, this becomes a truly terrifying instrument to transmit to Gareth Williams' fellow workers at GCHQ and MI6, and the people he was working with, was it the National Security Agency in Fort Meade?
Yeah.
So this mechanism in the shadows, cowardly, brutal, cynical, pathetic, scuzzy, is actually transmitting, I believe, real-time snuff films, like the one talked about by Thomas Barnett when the people threw themselves out of the building, and that's being used as an instrument of terror by criminals. So on the lawn of the Pentagon, the police were collecting evidence of terrorism. But what should have happened is they should have been protecting evidence of criminality. That is to say, a yellow tape should have been put around that site, and no one should have moved in or out of that site until a proper investigation had been done. Now, very similar to what happened with the pig farm. The evidence was actually buried in garbage hills, rather like the garbage hills of the Fresh Kills landfill on Staten Island, where there's a little girl who said, my dad is not garbage. Daddy was a firefighter, right? And what these vermin did, they took the evidence. Remember, some evidence is always wasted at these crime scenes, but evidence of wastage of evidence is actually very telling. Who's taking away the evidence and what is being done with it? Well, they sifted through the evidence at the World Trade Center, and they took the little bits out to Garbage Hills 1 and 9 at the Fresh Kills landfill. And one of my ambitions in life before I kick the bucket is that there's an exhumation of the human remains under Garbage Hills 1 and 9 at the Fresh Kills landfill, because then there should be a forensic analysis of the teeth. And what will the teeth say? The teeth which will have been preserved, there'll be a thermal signature that can ultimately be tracked back to what the temperature was at the center of the demolitions of those twin towers. And it will be found to be, I'm absolutely confident, a thermite type reaction at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit, which is twice the melting point of steel. All right. And anything hit with that kind of temperature is going to turn into a plasma, which is why, to a certain extent, large bits of the twin towers just floated away on a cloud of Manhattan on that morning of September the 11th. Over to you.
David, we've got some questions here in the chat. Stan is noting that you're talking about Robert Pickton, the Canadian serial killer, and he's wondering if you're trying to say that Pickton was a scapegoat. I don't think that's what you've been saying. You're just remarking that that the pig farm was. Why don't you tell us, what is it that you want everyone to understand about Robert Pickton?
Woody Pickton was a slightly handicapped individual, right, who slaughtered pigs and gutted them, etc., etc. The pig farm raves included 1,700 to 2,000 people. Now, I don't know if you've organized any big parties in your time, Jason.
Not 1,700 people.
1,700 people requires a lot of organization and logistics, okay? They have to be brought in on a Friday night. They've got to be accommodated probably at a nearby hotel. They've got to be taken out to the pig farm. The barn where these events were being held had been upgraded, so it was apparently the best equipped nightclub in Vancouver. And the women would do their tricks or whatever it was. They'd get free cocaine. But 60 women were killed over a period of 1996 to 2002. When the jury heard the testimony, they came to the conclusion that there was not evidence of pre-planning and premeditation, and he could not be convicted, this is Robert or Willie Pickton, of murder one. So he's basically convicted of being an accessory. Well, if you're an accessory, then you're not the guy in charge. And he's manifestly incapable of organizing a rave with 2,000 people and a rock band that came out from the downtown. I think, what were they? They were these grunge rockers. Dead on Arrival, I think, is a group. They actually played out there, right, the music, while these women were being killed. And Willie Pickton was responsible for disposing of the bodies and transporting the hookers from the downtown east side out to the pig farm. So there you have the jury saying this guy was not guilty of murder one. He didn't have the pre-planning and premeditation. These technologies that you and I have been talking about with the evil Batcave and the Northwestern University Information Technology partnerships and the kind of bit spreading pattern I'm talking about, it's the users and the owners and the custodians of those networks that do have the technology to put on a rave with 1,700 people at a pig farm, a staged ceremonial brutal torture killing of women, and then the clearing of the spoliation of the evidence. So I'm basically saying Willie Pickton, whether he's a patsy or not, he was, they reckon, the body man. right? He gutted the bodies, chopped them up, put them in the fridge, served up the cannibal feast, etc., etc. So over to you, Jason.
Well, I just wanted to ask, David, I'm not that familiar, or actually I'm not familiar at all with Vancouver. I've never been there. But this is the office building at 425 Carroll Street where Starnet Communications was located and was raided by a combination of RCMP and I believe FBI. Should be noted also that Mr. Sweigert is assembling an international team of conspirators to join his criminal RICO operation, which is monetized through Steemit. He agreed to monetize a harassment campaign against me in a video chat, a multi-party video chat that included Tyrone Simpson, Manuel Chavez, and Nathan Stoltman, three of his other co-conspirators in this criminal racketeering operation. So people need to be cautious about joining in with this, because if I am successful in getting the authorities to prosecute, these guys could face serious charges. I know you're running low on time, David, but we've got this downtown East Side Women's Center. It's only about 2 blocks away from Starnet Communications. A women's center seems to me like possibly some sort of shelter for maybe financially challenged or homeless or women who are involved in domestic abuse situations. I think this would be a vulnerable population, perhaps women and their young children. What do we know about the proximity to this, and is this the Lower East Side or the east side of downtown Vancouver?
It's close by, and I'll make 2 points. So it wasn't the FBI that were participating in that 100-person raid. It was Customs and the IRS, which is very interesting.
IRS,
they crossed the border. I don't believe they had permission from the Canadian government, or at least the ones that knew about this, and they took all the evidence away. Now, the networks that they took away, the policeman in charge of the raiding party, so to speak, said it was like Star Wars in there. So this was real high tech. Very few companies could sustain a global operation in child pornography, hardcore pornography, and online gaming. I believe it was deathball gaming, other than, let's say, McDonald Detweiler, which was in charge of the Entrust spin-off from Nortel Networks. So Nortel Networks had the fiber optic links. I believe what they were doing is they were transmitting through this bit spreading technique, live broadcast mass snuff film into hotels, 4-star and 5-star hotels, where the guests could bet on the time of death after, let's say, a prostitute had been shot by a medical, one of those sort of dumb medical carrying bullets. So now, I think it's very interesting the degree of sophistication of crimes that are incredibly brutal that is required to make sure they never get solved. And this comes back to the idea of engaging students in the use of the evil Batcave to reverse engineer crime scenes and cross-check the integrity and probity of the teachers. Because if you have a teacher's pension fund where, let's say, 6 key teachers have gone rogue on the fund and have set up some kind of cat bond fraud or serial cat bond fraud, like the burning down of the Paradise Homes, where certain teachers, through private foundations like the Clinton Foundation or private equity groups, are able to sponsor a catastrophe bond and trigger it and strip assets out of the teacher's pension fund, you're going to hell in a handbasket. So let's just go through those 6 teachers that are so important. You've got Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers, who were reckoned to have claimed that in order to protect their revolution, they'd need to kill 25 million Americans. And Bernardine Dawn is into seminars, torture paradigms, and practice. You've got Bill and Hillary Clinton, right, with the Clinton Foundation, and Hillary Clinton wandering around the world in this kind of bizarre arrangement where they find enemy groups within, but no enemy groups without. I look at that evil Batcave networking, it's hooked through to Russia and China, Jason. That is to say, that network is bringing in the resources of states hostile to America.
Well, David, any computer is linked to Russia and China via the internet, isn't it? I mean, that's where the public-private key infrastructure comes into place. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know you have very little time, and I wanted to point this out to you. This is an article I found while searching for that bit spreading patent, which we'll have to talk to people about on Friday on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. But this is talking about a 2009 merger deal between the Nortel spinoff Entrust and something called Thoma Bravo. I'm not familiar with Thoma Bravo, but this goes into some detail about the business elements of this deal, and it also talks a bit about Entrust. It says that they develop public key infrastructure and secure socket layer technology for encrypting and transmitting documents in electronic digital via internet. So that's weird. I don't know who wrote that, but Entrust started in Ottawa. I didn't know that. And they spun off, Nortel spun it off in 1997, and the company was incorporated in Maryland as part of a tax strategy, and after years of financial trouble, they're now unloading it. This goes on to talk about, this is an equity investment firm, this Thoma Bravo, and they manage $2.5 billion in equity capital. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this.
Can I just point out something there?
Yeah.
So that was a Nortel subsidiary that was spun off, and Sweigert's got to know a great deal about that. Nortel Government Networks got a contract with the Department of Justice, with Christine Marcy, I believe, when she was Assistant Deputy Attorney General, and they provided a facility called JABS, Joint Automated Booking System, for the Department of Justice to track prisoners and their guards and possibly their victims through the internet and through geography, like when they're being flown around on the Conair plane. I think, as you remember, I've called Christine Marcy, the sister of Phil McConnell, co-founder of Able Danger, and I'm very dismayed about where Able Danger is going, but I won't digress. So Christine Marcy, I call her the catalog woman, and I think she's associated with what I would describe as catalog crimes, where she has a database of the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, the pedophile that prey on them, the pimps that sell their services and entrap targets, possibly like the Clintons. And she can put together a SWAT team of psychopaths that could stage crimes. When I say she and her colleagues in the Department of Justice Pride organization, that could stage crimes such as the ones visited on the bodies of the women out at the pig farm, the Shermans, the John Benet Ramsey murder, and this brutal killing of Gareth Williams. Now, I don't know if my British colleagues have gone to sleep, but there are enough clues at the Gareth Williams crime scene to link it back to Chicago, the EVL Batcave laboratory, and the kind of vermin that infest the seminars on torture and paradigms and practice by Bernardine Dawn. Over to you.
Yeah, the one last thing I want to cover, because I know you've got to go, David. That's part of the reason why we were broadcasting early today. There, I guess, are some new viewers with us. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you here, and we hope you'll join us on Friday on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. People can also see that show on subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. People are asking, David, what's with this obsession with snuff films? It's not an obsession with snuff films. What we're describing is a quote from Dr. Thomas Barnett, who is an American military geostrategist. So these guys seem to complain that you and I don't know anything about military strategy or technology, but this is a quote from a doctor, someone who's a military strategist, who has said that 9/11 was the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. And all you're doing, David, is pointing out the technological capabilities of various technologies and asking the question, could this technology have been used? And again, you're not accusing the proprietors of the evil Batcave at the University of Chicago of doing this. You're merely pointing out that it is a technology or a group of technologies surrounded by a ring of patents that would in fact enable this activity. The simple nature of the Batcave being connected to the internet means it could receive a live broadcast. It's a very sophisticated multimedia environment that can display two-dimensional, three-dimensional, real-time generated computer imagery. So certainly it is within the capability, and asking this question is a worthwhile question. We're not making accusations in the way that the mentally challenged around the internet might. We're simply asking the question. And it's interesting to me to see this aggressive response from these individuals. And I'm thankful to David Sweigert for pointing out all the people that we need to contact to actually begin this investigation. I'm going to warn him again that his persistence in sending these false statements to business associates, including Jack Conte, just increases his exposure and increases the frequency with which he's engaging in the civil tort of tortious interference, something that's not going to look good to the various judges who are presiding over the civil lawsuits that he and his co-conspirators have brought.
Yeah, and could I just underline this point? So Dr. Thomas Barnett makes this phrase, or describes the events of 9/11 as the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. So I ask myself, as you point out, what technologies and what resources need to be available to what institutions to stage that? Because obviously it's a non-trivial challenge, right? In real time, high speed. And then the point that I'm making is I don't believe, certainly in the near term, you're going to ever get any of these people into a court to be charged with murder one. I think it's reasonable to suspect that there is a patent for rent murder for hire network operating at the highest level with the protection of the Department of Justice. What I believe, there is a remedy which doesn't expose the witnesses to the risk of, the kind of crimes visited on the children and Gareth Williams, etc., which is a wrongful death lawsuit. That is to say, if the custodians of the patents needed to produce the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history were either negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent in allowing the use of those patents, they are liable for wrongful death damage claims. So my idea is, with the student-driven use of the evil Batcave, they could start doing, and we can talk about that on Friday, ground truthing of the theory of the crime, like, for example, why is there a hole in the Pentagon's inner wall, and ultimately determine whether or not someone has been negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent in the use of patented devices that resulted in the wrongful death of the victims. I'm not interested in the murder one charge. Over to you.
It's very interesting, David. This is the first time I'm really looking at Dr. Thomas Barnett's Wikipedia page, and he's a PhD, I guess. He's at the Naval War College, and this is a guy who certainly knows a lot about military strategy. So you and I don't necessarily need to. We can read his writings and pose questions based on what he's saying. And here, it's talking about how the project was hosted by Cantor Fitzgerald and took place near the top of the World Trade Center after the offices of Cantor Fitzgerald and its carbon credit brokerage subsidiary Cantor CO2E were destroyed at One World Trade Center on 9/11. That's when Dr. Barnett described this as the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. It's interesting that the carbon credit brokerage of the Chicago Climate Exchange was started by Richard Sandor and Al Gore. It's worth mentioning that Richard Sandor's niece, Sherry Sandor, would seem to be in league with David Sweigert and his crew of co-conspirators who are so persistently using propaganda techniques to counteract the things that you and I are saying by twisting what we say and shifting what we say and engaging in all these civil torts and federal crimes, alleged federal crimes that I hope some of these agencies will investigate. David, I know we're beyond the time that you have for right now and you've got to run, so I want to thank you for joining me today. I definitely want to remind our viewers that it's very important that people visit patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and become a sponsor of David there on Patreon. We're bringing you these videos twice weekly on Wednesdays and Fridays. Of course, the Friday edition is available only on Patreon, and David's making daily blog posts here on Patreon. People can also join patreon.com/crowdsource the truth and sponsor the show. It's very important that people do that. I can't carry on with this work without the generous sponsorship of our viewers, and I am really thankful to those who are sponsoring the show. I also want to remind people, if they do not like Patreon, they can now join us on subscribestar.com, and that's just subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. All of the exclusive subscriber-only videos are available here as well. David, I'll see you on Friday. Thank you very much for another great show. Anything you'd like to say before we go?
No, thank you. Well, I'd like my little quote: "The truth is a juggernaut, and the rest is mud on the road."
Exactly. Thank you, David. I'll see everyone later today. We're going to have revelations from an individual who stopped the first 9/11 in 1999. So that'll be interesting. Everybody can tune in at 2 p.m. Eastern for that. Thanks for watching. I'll see everybody later.
Pleasures.